hello and welcome to the Exponential Australia Church Leaders podcast as we continue to go on the journey on behalf of the Australian Church of what it means to talk about and be passionate about multiplication and church planting right across the Australian ecosystem as we hear from a wide range of Aussie and global church leaders and specialists when it comes to hearing their journey and some of the things that have borne fruit. And today we are joined by Jason Elsmore. Jason is both the senior pastor of Gateway Baptist, which is a large multi-site Baptist church in Brisbane, as well as being the executive ministry director of the Queensland Baptists. Jason, it's fantastic to have you on the podcast today.
Thanks, Charlie. Great to be with you and great to hear what God's doing through Exponential and just watching your journey down in Sydney too. It's been really exciting as you and Jess have planted and just seeing what God's doing there is awesome.
So encouraging. Well, hey, we're going to talk about a wide range of things today. Particularly want to dive into some of your experiences, the things that obviously you're lending your hands at, and even some of the dynamics that are at play in how you balance those different things. But particularly for those who are seeing you or hearing you for the very first time, maybe they haven't been exposed to some of your ministry, particularly down south. Sometimes we just ignore what's happening in Queensland. And so give us a bit of a sketch of your journey. You're married to Susan, you've got some great kids, you're obviously very involved with ministry. But before we talk about the ministry side of things, just give us some of your journey.
Yeah, sure. Well, I haven't always been in Queensland. I did live south of the border for most of my life till I was 30. And grew up in the church. I grew up in a Christian home. My parents were believers at the Church of Christ in a little housing commission community in northwest Sydney called Tilapia. And probably the defining moment for me was my mum was, mentally ill for most of my growing up years. And I came home one day when I was 13 years old, and mum would often lock herself in the home. She suffered with severe agoraphobia and depression and anxiety, and was sort of heavily medicated just to be able to do stuff with us as a family. And I came home one day and she was just laughing uncontrollably. And it's quite a long story. It's quite a funny story when I unpack it all, but she was just out of control, wouldn't stop laughing. I didn't understand what was going on. I stormed out of the house just in frustration in the end. Came home a couple of hours later because I was a 13-year-old boy and was hungry. And thankfully my dad had come home and he said, "You're probably wondering what's going on with your mum." And I said, "Yeah, she's gone stark raving mad." And he said, "I think Jesus healed your mum today."
Wow.
And that day, a pastor who faithfully came and prayed with mum regularly, prayed for her that Monday morning, and that morning Jesus set her free like that. Wow. After 20 years of suffering from mental illness, and she couldn't stop laughing. She was just overcome with this new joy and this new freedom. Dramatically changed her life, healed her, changed our family, changed our whole dynamic. And at 13, I just realised, God is bigger than I thought. He's got power. But probably in my growing up years, he still kind of got in the way of my social life. And so I kind of lived one foot in the world, one foot in the church, and kind of 19 realised that the things of the world weren't bringing the joy that I really wanted. So I surrendered my life to Jesus at 19, and almost instantly he gave me a passion to share the gospel with young people growing up in this very broken community in this housing commission area. It was just instant, the Holy Spirit just put this passion in my heart. And just started doing that as a volunteer, started a youth group. It was the worst youth group in Australia. The police would come every second Friday night. There was holes in the wall. At one stage there was 24 boys and one girl, and she was tougher than all the boys. There was fights every week. It was awful. But in the midst of it, Jesus was changing some lives. And
so good.
After a little while, I remember sitting in the gutter at the end of one debacle of a Friday night, and I was talking to my mate James, who helped me run the youth group. And I said, "Wouldn't it be awesome to do this full time?" And because I thought everybody had a secret ambition to be youth pastor, but only a select few got to do it. But I thought everyone really wanted to do it. And I just remember him looking at me and going, nah. He said, I'm an engineer. I actually love being an engineer and I love helping you here on a Friday night, but I don't want to do this full time. Wow. And I just realised, maybe God's put a call on my life to just share the gospel, and that's what I've been doing, really for the last 30 years. Went to Bible college, got married. We grew up in church together. Susan thankfully waited for me to kind of get my life on track with Jesus. And we got married when I was 21 and had kids when we were only a year later. So she was supposed to keep teaching while I went to Bible college, and somehow she got pregnant. Not sure how that happened. But changed our plans, and 6 months into Bible college, I ended up full-time in ministry as a chaplain in a local school and youth pastor at that church where I grew up. And 4 young kids came along pretty quickly, and God said to me one day, it's time to leave all that you currently know behind and follow me. And I fought with him, so I thought I was going to stay in that church for the rest of my life. And I argued with God for 10 months, and finally we left with 4 kids, a mortgage, and not knowing where we were going. And long story short, God called us to Queensland, and been at Gateway Baptist Church ever since, and just loved what God's doing there for the last 20 years. And our kids have grown up there, and they're all still part of the church, which we love. A couple of grandkids now, they're also part of the church. It hasn't all been easy. Our third daughter got diagnosed with anorexia nervosa when she was 14, and we had some really tough years, and had to be hospitalised. And thankfully after a number of years, it was a pretty dark journey for us. We saw God break through into her life, and she's been healed and set free. But lots of challenges in ministry, but we've just loved seeing what God's doing.
So good, Jason. Thanks for giving us such an encouraging sketch, not knowing some parts of that journey myself, to hear of the way that the Lord worked remarkably in your family and the power to kind of transform families even to where you are today. And that does bring us to where you are today. And you, as I introduced before, you lead a fairly well-known church called Gateway Baptist in Brisbane, in addition to leading the Queensland Baptists. And we're going to talk about, I guess, both sides of the coin there, and also how they kind of interact with one another. But I'd love for you to tell us more of, you mentioned you've been at Gateway now for 20 years. Before we hit record on this podcast today, we were talking about this idea that up until that point, Gateway hadn't planted another campus or a church before. It had lots of incredible work that it did around the globe, but in terms of local church planting, that's something that has been relatively new. I wonder if you would just kind of tell us the story of some of your tenure at Gateway, why you guys became so committed to church planting. I'm sure it hasn't all been smooth sailing. Just tell us some of that story as to how you've stepped into that as you've been at Gateway.
Yeah, sure. I always had this sort of passion in my heart for church planting. Even when I was in Sydney, I just remember driving around certain places and thinking, I'd love to plant a church there. I'd look at buildings and think, I could just imagine a community of people coming together there. And I never did it when we were in Sydney, and got to Queensland. I actually started as the evening congregation and young adults pastor, and loved it. Loved working for the senior pastor at the time. But I got to that point where I was just busting the lead, and so I actually went to the senior pastor and said, look, have you got any desire to plant a church or plant a campus? Because I love working with you, but I just know I've got to lead something. I'd love to go and plant. And he said, just hold your horses. I'm just about to resign, and let's just see, what God does. Anyway, that was, a pretty pivotal time. I ended up, moving from the young adults pastor to become the senior pastor. Yeah. And so I didn't go and plant myself like I thought was going to happen, what I was sort of preparing myself for. But I knew as I started that one day we needed the plant, and we just couldn't keep putting it off forever. But yeah, by then we were 80 years old as a church, and we never planted a church. As you said, we've done a bunch of great things around the world and reaching people with the gospel, but never planted another church or another campus. And we didn't know whether we wanted to become a multi-campus church. So a couple of years in, we just had to go. We sent one of our best leaders with a group of people. We prayed for 50 to go with him, and I think 39 went. So we didn't quite get there. We, had a reasonable core group down, just at half an hour down the highway from where Gateway is. And really quickly growing area. At the time, it was the fastest growing area for 0 to 8 year olds. There was just young families just moving in droves. And, one of our, really the strengths of our ministry was reaching young people with the gospel. And so, we decided to have a go and see whether we wanted to just keep planting churches or become a multi-campus church. And it took us 4 years to realise, okay, we really think multi-campus works for us, and we think there's efficiency in it that'll help us keep planting churches. It took a couple of years to change our constitution, change our leadership structure, a whole bunch of things to become a multi-campus church. So we planted, took us another couple of years, to plant again. But then we kind of went pretty rapid fire once we've made all those changes. And so we planted 3 more campuses in 18 months, which was a little bit crazy. I wouldn't do it again. I wouldn't recommend it for everybody. But, we truly became a multi-campus church, and God blew our minds, just provided people and resources in ways we didn't expect. A lot of it just came out of the way God spoke to us in prayer meetings and just gave us some direction for the future. And we couldn't have planned it. We kind of knew we wanted to do it, but it wasn't until we started moving by faith and just started, praying into it that God provided, above and beyond what we could have possibly imagined.
Wow. Jason, I'm thinking particularly of like church leaders who might be listening to this podcast, and maybe their church isn't 84 years of age, but maybe it's been around for 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, and they're probably sitting in exactly the same seat that you may have been, going, oh, we haven't planted a church. I wonder if you'd speak to like the what you were able to do to prepare Gateway to plant, or like was it a rhetoric that you guys spoke for a 12 months? Was it what kind of strategies did you implement? I think particularly of Bishop Rick Thorpe. He talks about this idea that the flywheel, to actually get it going, is hardest. Like when the flywheel's going, it becomes easier because it gets in the DNA and the culture. But actually to get the flywheel going is actually pretty tough. How did you guys get the flywheel going?
Yeah, no, that's really, really true, Charlie. We harped back constantly as we shared the vision to our past. And so what we discovered was that in 1928, we became a multi-campus church. We just called it something different in 1928. It was called an outstation. So we were an outstation of Greenslopes Baptist Church. And we actually stayed an outstation for over 20 years, all the way through World War II. We were just an outstation. We were essentially a campus of Greenslopes Baptist Church. And it was just, someone was sent out. His name was Reverend Edwin Keith, to start a Sunday school to reach young people in the community. And, we just talked about that has been what we've been doing for the last 80 years, is reaching young people in our community. And it's time to ride our bike down the road again, like Reverend Edwin Keith did 80 years ago, and open some new doors for more people in more places to hear the good news of Jesus. And so, we envisioned and preached that a lot. We also had another picture of a mulberry tree that, you take It was a very visual picture. You take a branch off a mulberry tree and you plant it in a new place, and another mulberry tree starts to grow from the original, but it's not long. And up in Queensland, mulberry trees grow very quickly. The bit that was missing, you can't see anymore. And so there's another mulberry tree growing, but the original mulberry tree is continuing to flourish. And so we just talked and prayed into that picture constantly, and just helped people to see that they could be part of opening new doors for more people to hear the gospel. We wanted 50 to go, but 50 didn't go. We didn't quite reach our target. The first one was the hardest one. Yeah. The next 3, we wanted 50 people to go as well. And the second one, 140 people went. The third one, 80 or 90 people went. The fourth one, about over 100 people went. And it was grief. Like, it was kind of like, oh man, as much as I'm excited about opening new doors for the gospel, these are people I love. These are people I've seen every Sunday for 15 years. And I'm not going to see them every Sunday anymore. And every time we stood them on stage and commissioned them to go, I'm thinking, oh, don't tell me you're going. I don't want you to go. So there is cost and there is pain, but it definitely got easier as people saw that the first one worked. They saw people coming to know Jesus. They saw disciples being made. They saw that it was still part of Gateway. They thought, oh yeah, I could be part of that. I could go and move closer to. I could move into my postcode. So people were driving 30 minutes to come to a fairly large regional church, but their unchurched neighbours weren't going to drive with them. So that was the whole vision behind it, that if we planted in their postcode and gathered the people in that postcode or surrounding postcodes, that their unchurched neighbours might come with them. They might come to Alpha, or they might, join some other community event, which would just give them a doorway into hearing the gospel and coming to know Jesus. And so, people had to see it. There's some early adopters. Those 39 were the early adopters. Then as people saw it, they jumped on it, with great faith.
That's incredible, Jason. And wouldn't it be amazing if the narrative that was spoken of in the Australian church was, sure, maybe not everyone's going to plant a church themselves, but you can play a role in church planting. Like, everyone in the life of the church can play a role in church planting in the way that it fulfills the Great Commission. And I guess the kind of flip side of your role that I want to get to is now that you also find yourself in a bivocational capacity, as you also are the ministry director for the Queensland Baptists. How did you fall into that? Was that something that you ever aspired to do as you were also in church leadership? Tell us how that came about and how you juggle the two roles.
Yeah, I didn't fall into it. I think I got pushed into it. And it certainly wasn't anything I ever aspired to or ever thought was in my trajectory. But what I do think, what was true was I had this passion for the local church in Australia, and I wanted to do anything that I could do to encourage and empower and make the local church in Australia more effective missionally. And so I thought that would be, speaking at the occasional conference, finding pastors that I could encourage and mentor, and I did some of that. But I never thought it would actually be in leading a movement, mainly because I'd always seen it in the Baptist Church of Christ world as a full-time role. And I always saw myself as a local church pastor. So I thought, I can't do that because I really want to pastor people. And Queensland Baptists made a really courageous change as they did a leadership restructure. They decided that they wanted to find someone who was still active in local church leadership that could also lead the movement, but had their feet on the ground, still involved in leading the local church. And I still didn't think it was me because it kind of looked impossible. How was I going to juggle? Well, how was anyone going to juggle both roles? But I just began to have a couple of people just nudge me in that direction and suggest that maybe it's something I should consider, something I should pray about. So I started doing that, and I just entered into a discussion with the board. I didn't actually apply at the beginning. I just put in an expression of interest and said, look, I'm happy to have a conversation. And they wanted to keep talking to me. I was just sitting on the beach one day, a bit confused, honestly, going, God, is this really what you want me to do? And I didn't get a clear answer. But I just as I was praying that prayer, a plane flew over and just began to land in Coolangatta Airport. And I just felt the Spirit of God sort of whisper to me, how would you feel if you're on that plane, just coming back from somewhere in Queensland, encouraging, empowering, helping churches to be more effective in reaching their community. And it was just almost this instant joy just filled my heart. So, yeah, I'd love to do that. And at the end of the day, I think I just made the decision on that moment. Just felt like the Spirit was just filling me with joy, and I was willing to give it a go.
Beautiful.
So that's what I've been doing for the last 3 years, leading Gateway, which is one church and 6 campuses, and leading the Queensland Baptist movement. It's been the biggest leadership challenge of my life.
Right.
But, it feels like God's doing something. Probably the most exciting bit I can say is you've probably heard my heart. I just love seeing churches being missionally effective. Last year, at the same time, Gateway baptised more new believers than ever before in our history, and so did QB.
Wow.
Queensland Baptists together, we baptised more people ever before than in our 170-year history. So God's doing something in the midst of some of the challenges of leading 2 organisations. There's spiritually hungry people out there. If we'll have a go at sharing the gospel, they're coming to know Jesus. And so, that energises me enough to keep going as I try and work out how to juggle both roles.
And praise God for that, Jason. That's amazing. And I'd love to hear just really quickly before we get to how you balance and the tension of those 2 roles. Tell us about some of the exciting initiatives that are happening for the Queensland Baptists at the moment. I know you obviously want to see more churches planted across the state. What are some of the things that are really energising you and your role there?
Yeah, I mean, we've made some important leadership, decisions in restructuring and put on someone, full time in church planting and evangelism, just to, just get some strategies in place that will help raise up the next generation of church planters and, equip, empower, or support them as they go out, all different types of church plants. And we're just starting to get some traction there. I'd like that to be moving a little bit quicker. But it's church planting's hard. It's hard work, but there's some good things happening there. Probably one of the exciting things we had a go at last year. We just encouraged every QB church to do Alpha in Term 3, 2023.
Wow!
And not everyone did. We got 220 churches, but the exciting bit was we went from about 50 churches doing Alpha every year to over 100. And so,
awesome.
We doubled in a year. And probably the story we kept hearing from people, and the reason we did it was there's a lot of churches out there that I just felt had lost confidence in the power of the gospel to transform their community.
Yes.
They were holding on to the good news of Jesus, and they knew they were saved. They hadn't lost confidence in the truth of the gospel, but they'd lost confidence in their ability to actually share it in a way that would see people come to know Jesus and have their lives transformed. And so he said, look, just have a go at Alpha. It's not the only thing that is effective in sharing the gospel, but why don't we all do this together? And Alpha really got behind us and helped to do the training. And probably the story we heard was we had a go at doing Alpha for the first time, or the first time in a long time. It didn't go according to plan, but some people got saved anyway.
Oh, good.
And that's what I love hearing. And it just feels like there's just, maybe a growing confidence that there is a spiritual hunger out there. If we have a go at sharing the gospel in culturally relevant ways, that, people might come to know him, and the church might just keep growing.
Yeah, that's great, Jason. And as I've alluded to a couple of times, I'd love to now hear, particularly as a leader such as yourself straddles both roles, in your role with Gateway, of course, you're still having to lead in terms of governance and compliance and all the stuff of ministry leadership, but you could argue it's probably a more pioneering role. You're breaking new ground. There's new initiatives that are happening through the local church. And yet I can imagine as you step into the role that you also lead with QB, there's also a lot of institutionalization. There's things that, there's maybe much more of a mentality of we need to maintain the status quo. And just that balance that it must be such a challenge. As you mentioned, one of the greatest challenges in your leadership. How do you kind of exist in both worlds of both pioneering and yet still the good corporate governance of a role like you would fulfill? How do you kind of balance those two things in tension?
Yeah, look, the easy answer is a lot of prayer and only by the grace of God, and that's true, and that's always true. Besides that, I think it's like anything that God calls you to do in leadership. You just got to get the right people around you. So both boards, board of elders at Gateway and the board at QB. They both want the senior leader to be responsible for, vision, strategic direction, and the key communicator. And so I'm trying my hardest to stick at doing just those things. There's a lot of other things you get pulled into in ministry, but I've had to get even more and more disciplined in just sticking to doing essentially those three things, and making sure we've got people in our teams in both QB and at Gateway who are doing all of the other important leadership functions and all of the other roles that need to get played to be an effective local church. And so, just building teams around us so you can delegate, trust, and empower others to actually do the role. And so you certainly can't juggle this by being a micromanager. You really do have to empower people to make decisions and to lead the areas that you give them responsibility for. Thankfully at Gateway, I've been there a long time now, and so we've built a fantastic team. There's people where we've worked together in that senior leadership team that we've worked together for 10 or even 20 years. And so there's a lot of long-term people who hold the culture, they hold the DNA, they know the decisions that need to get made, and they don't need me to make them. And at QB, I'm stepping into a place where I'm always going to be a change agent. I'm always looking at things and saying, how can we change this to be more effective? And I think in general, that's the desire and the heart of certainly the leaders and the board at QB. And so they're wanting to see change. They're wanting to see us become more effective. And so, it's just discerning the rate of change that the culture will cope with.
Yes.
I've probably found myself at times having to be the one that's the wet blanket or the handbrake, because I just know that we've got to stage the change, because we've got to take everyone with us. Otherwise, you're not leading people; you're just a leader out for a walk on your own.
Yes.
And it's just trying to get that right, but not allow fear to be the thing that holds you back. And I've always got to be just listening to, is this the Spirit that's leading us in this direction, or is it fear that's stopping us going in that direction? Is it ego wanting to go there too fast, or is it God taking us there? Those things you always got to keep in check, and have great team, accountability, great mentors, coaches, just people. You can't do it on your own. I think the days of being the kind of leader that just goes up on the mountain, hears from God, and comes back and tells everyone what to do. I don't know if it ever worked, but it certainly doesn't work in Queensland Baptists. So, I think, having a team of people around you, listening to the voice of God together, discerning that together, empowering people it's...
Jason, I wonder for a church leader who's listening today, who's potentially in a bit of a microcosm. Like it may not be like straddling two roles, but they're definitely in the mentality of, we want to plant, we want to multiply, we want to do something new, and yet I'm still staving off the institutionalization of any organization that I'm leading. Like, has there been some good change managing in that for you? If there was someone today who was listening going, we want to plant a church, but I just don't have margin, I just don't have room to do new things.
Yeah, I think that's always a challenge. I think, the leader's got to, keep climbing up the tree and just getting a view of what's going on and working out what are the things that I really should be doing and what are the things that I need to empower others to do. I think sometimes we talk about it in very negative language, like things we just got to let go of, or things we got to stop doing, or things we got to drop. I think there's a different way of communicating. It's things that we can actually empower others to do, and they might actually do it better than us. And so if there's anything that you're doing that other people could do better than you, just finding ways to give that away to create the margin. You're the only one. If I could just speak to leaders for a minute, particularly if you're in a senior leadership position or a solo leadership position, you're the only one that can create the margin. Other people can't do it for you. They can give you permission to do it, your board, your elders, your diaconate, whatever governance group you've got, accountability group you've got, they can give you permission to do it, but they can't walk in your shoes, and they can maybe help you to do it. They can maybe help you to brainstorm. But it's only you that can really create that margin. And
Yes.
That's, in every leadership season and transition, you've got to, I'd say I'm in that again. I'm 3 years in to juggling both roles and going, I was dead on my feet at Christmas. I can't do another year quite like that. And so at the end of the year, I just had to say, what do I got to change? How am I creating margin differently so that 2024 is more sustainable than 2023 was? And I'm just loving God and loving my wife and loving the church and loving people better than what I did at the end of last year. And so I've had to make some changes to do that better, and I just think we can all do it, and we all have to do it regularly. So the little, probably for me, it's that little heart check every quarter, just getting away with God and saying, okay, God, what's not right here? What's got to change in some way, just to walk with you differently, to walk with you, more humbly, more intimately, so that I can do this till the day I die.
Yeah. So good. Jason, I've got one final question for you, and this particularly relates to your heart as an evangelist. You've been the author of a book, Jesus the Bloke. You're a Westie at heart. You're a Queenslander by adoption. You've clearly got a very visible heart for those who are outside of the church and the missional impetus of church planting, Alpha, those things that are going to actually reach people. I wonder, just in terms of some parting words for our listeners today, what would you say to those in church leadership or who are in these roles of trying to catalyse, how can we be on mission more effectively? Leave us with some of your heart.
Yeah, look, I just love Jesus' heart for the lost. Luke 15, probably my foundational passage. Every one lost person is so valuable to God that they become the priority. He notices, when they're missing. And there's a plan to go and search for them. And when they're found, there's a celebration in all of heaven. And I love the fact that Jesus told those famous parables because he was getting in trouble for eating with sinners and tax collectors. And in fact, he was getting in trouble for welcoming them to his table. And sinful people just wanted to be around Jesus. And so it grieves me that sinful people, don't want to be often around Christians or in our local churches. And so, at least once a year, I say to our church at Gateway, on Sundays, I want to smell more smoke in the foyer. I want to hear more swearing. I want to see more people walking in with hangovers. I'd prefer if it wasn't the pastoral team. But I just want to know that our community feels welcome to come just as they are and discover the life-changing message of Jesus. And so, that's been my heart for a long, long time. I just want lost people broken people to feel welcome in the body of Christ, and to discover that, Jesus is the hope of the world, and he's the hope for them, and he can heal their brokenness. And I just believe there's a spiritual hunger out there. And I believe that, why I wrote Jesus the Bloke is I'm just convinced most Aussie blokes would like Jesus if they met him. They'd be those sinners and tax collectors that'd want to hang out with him. He's a good bloke to go fishing with. He's a good bloke to have around when the drinks run out of the party. He's a good bloke to have when you're camping, you run out of food. It's like I've kind of written in an unashamedly bogan way, because I grew up in building site sheds and footy sheds, and I just didn't see anyone writing or producing anything that was really speaking to that culture. And so, it is written for that culture, and some people don't like it for that reason. And I don't care, because I'm getting letters from people that have come to know Jesus through it. And that's who I wrote it for. And I'm just saying, in every culture, it doesn't matter what culture in this nation that you are living in, it doesn't matter what postcode you're in, I just believe there's a spiritual hunger out there. They may not like the church that much, and they may have a bit of a warped understanding of what the church is all about, and they may have a bad experience from the past. But people have bowed down to idols that they've discovered have come up short, and they've found looking for their identity in things that have just led them to confusion. There is a spiritual hunger out there. If someone will have a go at sharing the good news of Jesus with people in that postcode and that culture, people will come to faith.
Yeah.
There are people everywhere. Jesus was right. That's not that surprising. Fields are ripe for the harvest. Don't say 4 months more. There's a plentiful harvest out there. There's plenty of people ready to hear the gospel and receive the good news, but the workers have always been few. And so we've got to pray for more and more workers that are willing to multiply, they're willing to share, they're willing to go out and plant, take some risks. I actually think the church in Australia is in an exciting place, and I'm looking forward to all that God's going to do in the future. If we'll just, get his heart for the lost and get the faith to have a go at sharing the gospel and planting churches, God will do something great.
Quite incredible, Jason, and we say yes and amen on behalf of Exponential Australia. It's been an absolute honour to have you on the podcast, to hear your passion, your leadership, the different roles that you straddle and the way that you do it. We so appreciate having you on the podcast today, Jason.
Thanks, Charlie. Thanks for all you're doing, and look forward to catching up again soon.